Hello London, we are ready for your vote.
Hello, I'm Stephen Perkins, and this is Douze Points, the Eurovision-centric podcast from the team behind Binge Watch. First and foremost, a quick apology from me. You have no doubt noticed that this podcast is a little bit later than usual, and that's because I had a lovely family birthday celebration over the weekend, which also coincided with a really busy week at work the last couple of days, so it has taken me a little bit later to get around to recording. But, on the bright side, it does mean that I'm able to pick up a few bits of breaking news that I would have missed if we dropped as usual on Monday morning. It's almost like I planned this. So before we get to the latest batch of songs confirmed for this year's contest, let's quickly check in on those headlines. First of all, Swedish broadcaster SVT has announced some changes to the format and rules for this year's contest. Now don't panic, they're not making everyone stand on stage while they reveal the results of the semi-finals again, although these tweaks could be equally controversial. Perhaps the biggest and most impactful is the news that, in the grand final, the voting lines will be open from the start of the performances rather than after they end as usual. Now, this performance has been trialled at Eurovision before in 2010 and 2011, before they went back to the original system, so it will be interesting to see if it sticks around this time. I'm sure it's a complete coincidence, by the way, that this rule change was announced around the time that Sweden drew performance slot number 1 in this year's final. Also, the online vote for the rest of the world, i.e. nations not participating in the contest, will open at the end of the second dress rehearsal and stay open until the live show begins, giving fans almost 24 hours to vote. This could very much change the structure of the televote this year and might mean that the usual coveted performance positions, around 2/3 of the way through the contest, aren't quite as powerful as usual, but we shall see. It may change nothing. The other big change this year is that the Big Five and the host country will get to perform live and in full during the semi-finals. Previously they only got to share a snippet of their dress rehearsal during the intervals, but now they will each get a showcase spot somewhere in the main competitive running order. Executive producer Ebba Adelson said, "We think this change gives the Big Five countries and the host country a fairer playing field in the grand final. It is also a win for both the audience in the arena and the viewers at home, in that they get to see all the acts competing this year live before the grand final." Leaving aside whether it's truly a win for the viewers to have to sit through Germany's entry twice this year, it's interesting that this is being billed as an increase in fairness. Personally, I think you could argue that not getting your song heard in full for the first time until the Saturday night is an acceptable trade-off for buying your way straight through to the final, and I don't think many fans felt that the Big Five were being unfairly disadvantaged up to this point. Quite the opposite, I should think. But arguably the Big Five frequently underperform in the final, or at least Germany and the UK do, with Spain and France somewhere in the middle and Italy usually performing pretty strongly. So it will be interesting to see if this changes things very much, and indeed if this particular format sticks around for longer than this year. Finally, and this is only a rumour, so perhaps it's unfair to report on it right now, but I'm so excited I can't completely ignore it. It's rumoured that Sertab will be one of the interval performers this year. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Sertab won for Turkey in 2003 with Every Way I Can, one of the absolute biggest certified bangers to have ever won the contest, and for that reason alone, I really hope this is true. Okay, so onto the song news. This week, or rather last week, we had confirmations from Australia, Greece, Israel, Sweden, Portugal and Georgia, so let's have a little closer look. Australia this year will be represented by Electric Fields with the song One Milk Alley, One Blood. A couple of firsts happening here. They are the first duo to represent Australia at Eurovision, and it's the first time that Eurovision has had an entry which incorporates Yankuni Tijara, an Aboriginal language. I'm all for countries giving their native cultures a showcase on the world stage at Eurovision, and I'm very excited to have an Aboriginal voice in the contest this year. Electric Fields came close to Eurovision once before. In 2019, they entered Australia Decides and finished as the runner-up to Kate Miller-Heideker's Zero Gravity. That's the one where she dressed like a fairy and flew around the stage on a giant wobbly pole, which is, for my money, the absolute most grating song that Australia have sent to Eurovision in their short time in the contest. So I'm glad these two are finally getting their turn in the spotlight. I actually really love this track. It's got incredible warmth to it, and Zachariah Fielding's voice is absolutely stunning on the studio version, so I really can't wait to hear this one live. Hopefully it will not disappoint. Greece next, who will be represented by Marina Satti with Zari, which, as I mentioned in a previous show, is Greek for dice. This is an interesting one to me because it starts out feeling quite subdued and traditional, and then she puts a donk on it and it becomes more contemporary sounding, while still having lots of traditional elements to it, and it feels like it's going to lend itself to a really memorable stage performance. Apparently, this is already doing huge business in its home country and is Greece's best performing Eurovision song on their Spotify charts to date. So hopefully that's going to translate across the rest of Europe, especially after Victor Vernikos failed to qualify from the semis last year. Next on the list is Israel, who have been attracting a lot of headlines this year over whether they will be allowed to compete in the contest at all after their first two submissions, October Rain and Dance Forever, were allegedly rejected by the EBU for being overtly political in content. At first, broadcaster KAN said that they would not change the lyrics if requested to do so by the EBU, but then the incident escalated, and it's reported that Israeli President Isaac Herzog intervened to ensure that the lyrics would be amended to allow Israel to participate in Eurovision this year. Now, you can argue over the concept of overt politicisation of the contest when a country's president is getting involved to ensure that they get their moment on the stage, but the end result is that Eden Golan will be representing Israel this year with Hurricane, which is reportedly a rewritten version of October Rain. This would normally be where I would talk about my impressions of the song. I'm not going to do that. In light of Israel's military operations in the Gaza Strip, I'm going to follow the lead of several of the other Eurovision fan outlets and limit my commentary on their presence at this year's contest to the bare details. I will address their participation in factual terms, such as whether they qualify for the final and how they do when they get there. I don't plan to say much beyond that, and I won't be making any further comment on the merits or otherwise of the song, the artist, or the performance. With that in mind, let's move right along to our host country, Sweden. Over the past 6 Saturdays, they have been holding their national final, Melodifestivalen, or Melfest if you prefer, and they finally chose their winner last Saturday, Unforgettable by Marcus and Martinus. Now, if you are a Melfest regular, those names will already have been quite familiar to you before this year, because Marcus and Martinus were the runners-up to Loreen last year with Air, a song that would probably have romped to victory any other year, so it's not really that surprising that they decided to come back for another go. These two are 22-year-old twins from Norway, not Sweden, who have already got a win in the Junior Melody Grand Prix to their name, and they also won the Swedish version of The Masked Singer in 2022. So it's pretty safe to say that their live performance skills aren't anything we need to worry about. But if I'm honest, I can't say I'm particularly enthused about this song, which feels like it covers a lot of the same ground as Air, but somewhat ironically given the title, without being quite as catchy or as memorable. I don't think they're going to do badly at Eurovision by any stretch, because I should think the whole non-threatening boys factor will serve them well with younger voters, and Sweden have generally not had much trouble winning over the juries, so it should be a fairly solid performance from the home country. But, at the same time, I don't think we're likely to see Sweden overtaking Ireland for the most victories in total at Eurovision this year. Portugal were also holding their national final on the same time. Apologies as ever for my pronunciation here, Festival de Canção, on Saturday, although theirs didn't go on for quite as long because they just had the 2 semi-finals feeding through to the finale. Theirs was won by Yolanda with Grito, though she didn't quite manage to top the televote. That honour went to João Bosch with Pelas Casturas, who had a narrow margin of 0.71% over her with the public. However, Yolanda had a much stronger performance with the juries, and the 50-50 weighting between the two tipped the scales in her favour, and João finished as the runner-up. For what it's worth, out of the two frontrunners, I think this was probably the right call. João's entry was a little bit more idiosyncratic and, dare I say, maybe slightly less tuneful, and while I think it may have had a little bit of appeal for the goth vote, I don't think that would have been enough to carry it home, especially with Norway making such a strong play for it this year. I think Yolanda's song feels pretty heartfelt and could do quite well in what is otherwise a fairly up-tempo semi-final. And also, if she does well this year, we can perhaps claim some credit by association because she studied songwriting at BIMM University in Sussex. Finally, for this roundup, it's Georgia, who will be represented in Malmö by Nutsa Baladze with Firefighter. One of the things that really excites me about this is that it demonstrates that the American Idol to Eurovision pipeline is finally real. You might not be aware that American Idol is still a thing. I myself am constantly surprised that it is still on the air as well, given that it now seems to be on about the same level as The Voice when it comes to producing viable stars. But Nutsa was one of the finalists in last year's contest and made it to the top 12, as well as being invited back to perform with Kylie Minogue for the final. I'm going to hold my hands up and admit I haven't watched American Idol properly since about 2014, so a lot of my knowledge is second-hand these days at best, but I gather she was kind of the comedy contestant. Not in the sense of not being able to sing, because she's clearly got pipes, but because she was the wacky, dramatic one. Mind you, if anything is going to stand her in good stead at Eurovision, it's knowing how to stand out in a crowd, and all that experience of playing to a large-ish live TV audience can't hurt either. I think Firefighter is a pretty good track. It feels very high energy and there's lots of room for some vocal showboating. My main reservation at this stage is that the song itself feels a little on the generic side in a year that I think is generally one of the strongest and most competitive contests we've had for a while. So this is where Nutzer's showmanship, or showwomanship if you prefer, is likely to be make or break for Georgia this year. So that just leaves us with Armenia and Azerbaijan, who have both confirmed their artists at this stage, but not yet their song. So we should expect to have the full roster for this year's contest very soon indeed. All being well, I will be back with another episode next Monday, returning to the usual schedule. Thanks again for bearing with me this week, and don't forget to hit subscribe on your podcast platform to ensure that you don't miss an episode if our release schedule ever gets this erratic again. And if you could leave us a nice review while you're there, that would really help us out too. You can also follow the team on Twitter at bingewatch_pod and me personally at Stephen Perkins. Until next time, good night Europe and good morning Australia.